Hello, San Diego. My name is Peter Miller. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I've had the pleasure of showing many films over the years as part of the San Diego Jewish Film Festival, institution that I'm really proud to be associated with. And I just love sharing my films with audiences there. Somehow they spark wonderful conversations, and it really feels like a second home. I'm here at this unusual time as we are taking our programming online in my apartment in New York City, where I live and work, and am happy to talk with you about filmmaking and the kind of work that I do and the kind of work that I really love sharing with audiences out in San Diego. I've been making films for up to around 30 years at this point. I've kind of lost track. Many of my films are about history and culture, and especially films about music, which somehow I've been lucky enough to make a number of films. The last music film that I shared out in San Diego was a film about a conductor of orchestras and choruses named Robert Shaw. The film is called Robert Shaw, Man of Many Voices, and it told the really improbable story of this extraordinary man who really changed the world through his orchestra conducting. I think I've shown, half a dozen films. I showed a film called Refugee Kids, One Small School Takes on the World, that won a documentary prize out there a few years ago, which was a half an hour short about children who come to America to learn how to be American school children during the course of one formative summer. I showed Jews in Baseball, an American love story there. And the film I want to talk with you about today is a film that's very close to my heart. It's a music film about a phenomenal, fascinating, interesting, and really amazing songwriter named Doc POMUS. The film's called AKA Doc POMUS. Doc POMUS was born Jerome Felder. He was a Jewish boy from Brooklyn who, at the age of 6 years old, contracted polio during the polio epidemic. It was as we are living through now, and in a very different way, a public health scare that really impacted the whole world. And Jerome got polio, lost the use of his legs, and was on crutches or a wheelchair the rest of his life. He lived in an apartment in Brooklyn. He couldn't get around very easily. It was the Great Depression. Things got kind of stressful at home because he was in bed much of the time and dealing with just the usual issues of growing up. And he really felt the blues. And to me, the blues is the great American musical form. It's a musical form that combines all kinds of musical influences, African American, and lots of other things that happen to be in the air that express joy and meaning from things that are often difficult and painful. And Doc was a guy who was really going through some tough times, heard on the radio the great blues singer Big Joe Turner, and said, that's what I want to do. I want to be a blues singer, which of course is ridiculous because Doc Jerome was a teenage, disabled, heavyset Jewish kid on crutches who was the most improbable of blues singers, but somehow managed to get himself into that world and started singing the blues, recording the blues, writing blues songs. And as this is all happening, this other form of music starts to percolate, and it's rock and roll. And rock and roll singers need songwriters to write their songs for them. And Doc, who had written songs for Ray Charles and the Drifters and other R&B artists, was uniquely equipped to write rock and roll songs. And in the course of his life, writes Why Must I Be a Teenager in Love, This Magic Moment, Save the Last Dance for Me, Viva Las Vegas, and 20 other songs that Elvis Presley sang. And lived a glamorous, fascinating life in the music world, where he was writing for the greatest artists of his time, and he had #1 hit after #1 hit, married a beautiful Broadway dancer and performer, had a family, moved to the suburbs, was really living the dream. And then, of course, the bottom falls out, because it does in these stories. And the thing about Doc's story, which is true of so much documentary filmmaking, when we're lucky, our stories are stranger than anything that fiction could create for us. Reality becomes this amazing source of stories that you couldn't make up. If you made up Doc Pomus's story, if you made up Jerome Felder's story of becoming the blues singer, songwriter, music star, people would laugh at you and say, this doesn't make any sense. This would be a foolish fictional story. But as nonfiction, we get to look and say, what really happened, and how do we bring this story to life? So what I realized is, not only was this guy an extraordinary songwriter, but he lived this life with ups and downs and difficulty and joy. So the bottom falls out of the songwriting world because the Beatles and Bob Dylan start writing songs for themselves. Pop singers no longer need songwriters. So Doc, who'd been working at the Brill Building, this hive of activity, becomes unable to ply his trade, and as a big, heavy guy on crutches, is not going to become a pop star like some of his colleagues at the Brill Building, like Carole King or Neil Sedaka or Paul Simon. He didn't have that option, so he becomes, well, I don't want to give it away, watch the movie, but he gambles for a living. And then, after many years, is able to dig himself out of this misery that he's had to fall into of making a living doing this card playing, and gradually becomes a mentor and a elder statesman in the songwriting world, mentoring people like John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Lou Reed, Dr. John, with whom he had a long and fruitful and wonderful musical collaboration, and he just left an impression on the lives of everybody he touched, many of whom appear in the movie. And the thing about this movie is that I was lucky enough to make this in collaboration with a amazing team of people. Doc's daughter, Sharon Felder, had decided to make a film about her dad. She wasn't a documentary filmmaker, but she was learning how to do it. And we combined forces to tell this story at the impetus of a man named Will Hector, a Toronto-based filmmaker, producer, who had produced a film that I directed a few years earlier called Jews in Baseball, An American Love Story. And we decided to make another movie, and it was about Doc. We collaborated with Sharon, who was able to introduce us to all these amazing people who were in Doc's life, singers and songwriters and music business people and people who loved him and loved his music. The first day that I go out to start making this film, filming interviews, are the two most amazing interviews I've had done. These people were articulate and soulful and smart and wonderful, and then I thought, this is interesting. And then the next day, they were even more soulful and interesting. And I realized that Doc had surrounded himself in his life with people who were smart, fascinating, raconteurs, people with giant hearts and souls, one after another, 30-something people that we interviewed for this movie. Every one of them made it into the film. Nobody landed on the cutting room floor, as they say. And that's not because I was being generous. It was because they were all such amazing characters and storytellers. And that's what we do in the world of documentary making is, it's about a subject and it's about a topic. It's about a songwriter who writes great songs. But really, it's about stories. And then the secret sauce in telling these stories is our film editors. On a good documentary depends on editing. I mean, shooting it is the easy part. It's putting it together. It's weaving together all these stories, putting them into a narrative trajectory with emotion and pacing and feeling and story and character development and all these things that you expect in a movie. We do that from the reality that we have gathered and from all these interviews and archival material we find, and especially in this case, music. So Amy Linton, who is my longtime film editor, we've made many, many movies together, and she has a magical touch with music. So in the course of telling Doc POMUS's story, where he wrote 1,000 songs, she mined the song catalog and found songs that fit emotionally and spiritually and lyrically with the stories we're telling. You know, the most important people in making a documentary is not the director, and it's not the producer, and it's not the camera person, and it's not the composer, or even the film editor, who's really important. It's really the people who are in front of the lens, the people whose stories we have the privilege to tell. And Doc's family, Doc's friends entrusted us with the opportunity to tell his story and put it on screen and share it with the world. And that's a huge responsibility. And it's one where you need to seek out what's really true and what's really genuine. And the truth isn't just about facts and dates and who went where and when. It's about the truth of emotion and how a human being whose story we're telling lives their life. And we had the amazing opportunity to tell the story of Doc POMUS in this movie. You know, people sometimes say to me, you ever thought about making real movies and not just documentaries? And to me, I say, no, I've never, ever thought about making narrative features with scripts. The beauty and the fun of making documentary films, for me, is that you go out looking for a story and it surprises you. And it takes you in directions you never expected to go. And that is, to me, it's kind of a Jewish act. You know, we answer questions with questions. And my entire career is spent asking people questions and then asking questions about those questions and digging and going off on searching the minutiae and the specifics of a person's life or of a moment in time that might offer much broader insights into who we are as Americans, who we are as people, how we live our lives, how we love and understand the world. And in a world that has become incomprehensible of late and completely maddening and confusing and sometimes out of control, looking at the past, studying history, thinking about how we got here is an act of claiming our humanity. And those of us who are lucky enough to get to do it by making documentary films, that's what we do. Thank you to the San Diego Jewish Film Festival for being a wonderful partner in the kind of work I've been lucky enough to do, and stay safe.